I spent about 43 years. I went to the University of Wisconsin in 1971. I grew up on a dairy farm, and the day I left for Madison, I basically packed everything I owned into the back of a Mustang car. And so I was about 2 pair of pants and a record player and some other clothes, and headed out to Madison. So I had everything I owned in this little car, and got to Madison and started working on something that I was very lucky to be able to do. Whenever I was a kid growing up on the farm, I guess, are you getting me on this? We're okay? I'm kind of wandering around, so hopefully that'll work. We had cattle dying of diseases, metabolic diseases, and infectious diseases. But these metabolic diseases that I saw on the farm were pretty dramatic, and some of our cows, that they would have their babies, and the next morning they'd be dead, and that was just very for a kid. That just wasn't a good thing to see, I didn't think, because we'd lose money, and it's pretty dramatic. So we learned what some of these cows died of, and one disease that we had is milk fever. It's not an infectious disease, but it's a metabolic disease. And I had the opportunity when I went to University of Wisconsin to work on this, and that'll be part of my slide presentation here. It's kind of divided into 3 parts. First part will be vitamin D, sort of some of the recent things that are going on. I did a lot of work developing analytical methods for vitamin D. I'll say a little bit about that, and then I'll get into the milk fever things. So hopefully I won't bore you too much. It won't be a whole lot of detail, but just a little overview of what I've been up to. These are the 2 main forms of vitamin D, vitamin D2 and vitamin D3. Vitamin D2 is the plant that we see, or the form that we see in plants. It results from the irradiation of ergosterol, and has very similar biological functions to vitamin D3 in mammals, at least. There are some species that vitamin D2 is not quite as active, or not active at all in, and poultry would be a good example of that. And they differ in the side chain in that vitamin D2 has a double bond here at C22 and a methyl group at C24. Now either one of these, both of these, either the vitamin D2 or the vitamin D3, get activated when they go to the liver. So the vitamin D2 or vitamin D3 either coming from the diet or UV irradiation of the skin is a very good way of getting vitamin D, and it goes to the liver and they get hydroxylated at the 25 position. And boy, my 3 got out of place there. But anyway, the 125 dihydroxy, that gets converted in the kidney to form 125 dihydroxy vitamin D, which is the active form of vitamin D. And its main function is to increase bone resorption and calcium absorption, from the intestine. It acts like any other steroid hormone. If you're familiar with how they act, this is a steroid hormone. It freely traverses cellular membranes, interacts with the receptor, which is located to the nucleus, and sets off genetic events, new messenger RNA production, and then synthesis of new proteins that are related to the supplementation or the presence of vitamin D in a biological system. Now, vitamin D, we now have learned, and more so in the past several years, that it's a multifunctional vitamin. It does more than what we were taught when I was in graduate school. That its only function was to maintain calcium homeostasis. So that means that it was necessary for calcium absorption, as I said, and that gets calcium into the system, and we can form our bones normally, and bones and teeth. But in the past 3 decades, we learned that the receptor, this receptor I was talking about, this nuclear receptor, exists in many tissues that don't have anything to do with calcium metabolism. And a lot of these, the response elements for these receptors are actually a leader sequence in 1,000 genes. So it seems like it should be doing things other than just, and these genes are in tissues other than the bone and the intestine. And we also note that the 1-hydroxylase, this is the CYP27B1, is the hydroxylase that activates vitamin D, is present and is functional in many tissues other than the kidney. We thought for a long time that the kidney was the only source of this 1-hydroxylase. And the last several years have shown that it's present in several tissues. Now this slide shows how dramatic an effect vitamin D can have on diseases, particularly some cancers and muscular diseases, or multiple sclerosis and diabetes. And down here on the x-axis, I have the serum level of 25-hydroxyvitamin D that results in some of these effects. And if we look over here on the left-hand side, this is rickets. This is where bone is not formed properly and they get bowed. It happened a lot in Europe and during the Industrial Revolution. And if you have levels of 25-hydroxyvitamin D between, if they're less than 10, there's about a 50-50 chance you're going to get rickets. If they're around 15 or 18, about 80% of that, you'll reduce the incidence of rickets about 80%. And so we actually, in order to prevent rickets totally, we probably need to be a little bit higher in this. But then we have other examples here. Colon cancer. Colon cancer comes out in almost every study to have a big, vitamin D influences the incidence of colon cancer, and this has been in almost every study I've read. And if you're down here at 32 nanograms per ml, you get about 50% reduction, and that gets even better when you get up into the 50 and 60 nanograms per ml. So a lot of evidence here, and we see the same thing with breast cancer, ovarian, diabetes is an interesting topic, and vitamin D has a dramatic effect on the incidence of that. You can actually almost eliminate it if you get up to some of these higher levels of vitamin D. And then multiple sclerosis is another good example. So these are some of the things that we've learned in the past couple decades, and more so in the past 10 or 15 years, that vitamin D does beyond the healing of bone or formation of bone. And this is resulted in what we call the vitamin D iceberg. The calcium economy here is the tip of that iceberg. Calcium economy meaning maybe the bone and intestine and so forth, but then we have these cell cycle and immune regulation systems, which are well below that and represent quite a bit of activity for vitamin D. And this is associated with more the endocrine and autocrine regulations of vitamin D in systems. Now, the endocrine regulations, as I said, it's more along the calcium economy. It regulates calcium absorption and bone resorption. The cell cycle, the autocrine regulations are more along the lines of cell proliferation, differentiation, apoptosis, and some immune responses. And here's the way we look at it. Within a cell, the autocrine, within target cells, the autocrine part of it, 25-hydroxy vitamin D, which is, now that's the major circulating form. I guess I should mention that if you go to a doctor and he orders a vitamin D test, well, it's not vitamin D, it's 25-hydroxy vitamin D. And that's the major circulating form in the body. And so that's a test that they will be ordering up. That gets into the cell, it's 1-hydroxylated to form 125, which can have local effect. All this is happening within the cell, which can affect genetic events. One of these genetic events is to increase its own catabolism, or the elevation in the enzyme called 24-hydroxylase to form 1,24,25-dihydroxyvitamin D. And that's sort of a very simplistic view of what happens. And I'll have a nice example of something here in a little bit about a good example of how the autocrine system works. And this 1-hydroxylase, which is the key component to this whole thing, is activated by various signals. And one of them is PTH, but PTH does not, let me take that back. PTH does not affect this, the upregulation of this hydroxylase in the autocrine events. It's other signaling mechanisms. Now over here is the kidney cell, and that's the endocrine part of it, where 25-hydroxy is converted to the 1-hydroxylase in a very similar manner, and 125. And this is the one that gets stimulated by the parathyroid hormone, and is directly related to the elevation in parathyroid hormone would usually occur if an animal, or if you get hypocalcemic, if your blood calcium goes low, or if you actually get vitamin D deficiency, or if your kidney stops functioning properly, there can be an elevation in parathyroid hormone, and thus stimulating this 1-hydroxylase enzyme. So, okay. So these, I have a good example here of these autocrine and regulations, regulatory functions. I mentioned the incidence of cancer and other diseases associated with vitamin D deficiency. There was a guy by the name of Apley who noted that people in northern states develop more cancer than people in the southern states. And similar observations have been made along the way that the incidence of tuberculosis is affected by vitamin D. If you get tuberculosis, you can actually get semi-cured by improving your vitamin D status. And I also mentioned multiple sclerosis earlier. Now this slide shows what happens with tuberculosis. It secretes a 19 kilodalton protein which interacts with this toll-like receptor. And then that activates genetic events directly, and this is one of these non-parathyroid hormone signals that we see. And it stimulates, I got a bunch of arrows going here, but it ultimately stimulates the production of the CYP27B. Now CYP27B again is the 1-hydroxylase. The hydroxylase that results in activation of vitamin D. And then that CYP27B1 increases the production of 125-dihydroxyvitamin D from the vitamin D binding protein, or from the 25-hydroxyvitamin D that's delivered to the cell via vitamin D binding protein. And again, here we got another genetic event going on here, stimulated by the 125-dihydroxyvitamin D. And that goes forth to increase the production of cathelicidins, which ultimately result in this bacterial destruction. Now, there's a real problem if the 25-hydroxy, this whole system doesn't work if 25-hydroxy vitamin D levels are less than 30 nanomolar. And they work best when they're above 70 nanomolar. So 30 nanomolar is, you divide that by 2.5. Anyway, it's a very low, about 10 or 12 nanograms per ml. And if you get levels below that, that's a real problem. And this was a really sweet study published by Liu in 2006 in Science, where he activated monocytes with the MTB 16 kilodalton protein, and he incubated these activated monocytes. He activated them with different types of serum. Serum taken from African Americans, serum taken from whites, and serum that was African American serum that had added 25-hydroxy vitamin D. And he noticed this dramatic difference in the cathelicidin. They measured cathelicidin, this bactericide produced. A significant effect on the ability of these different serums to activate the production of cathelicidin, and it was associated with the level of 25-hydroxy vitamin D in these treatments. And this particular serum had 22 nanomolar, so it was less than 10 nanograms per ml. And here we're getting close to 30 nanograms per ml in this particular serum treatment. And then he went even a little bit higher. I'm not quite sure how high he got here, but it shows the importance of the level of 25-hydroxy vitamin D in the serum to produce this cathelicidin and get bacterial destruction. Now there were sanatoriums that were set up way back when because we knew this relationship between UV light and tuberculosis. And people would commit themselves, I guess is a word to use, to sanatoriums here, where they would sit in the sun and thought it would help them get over the vitamin D or the tuberculosis. But there was a problem with the way these things were set up. We have glass here, and the UVB light, which is needed for vitamin D synthesis in the skin, couldn't make it through those windows or that glass, and so these were very ineffective at any sort of treatment of tuberculosis. And we didn't know that for a long time. And I showed you a little difference, or I showed you some experiments we were doing with African American and Caucasian serum. This shows that both types of skin can result in production of vitamin D. White skin takes about 20 minutes to produce the maximum amount of vitamin D. African American or darker skinned folks takes a little longer, about 2 hours to get the same level of vitamin D produced as a result of sunlight exposure. So they basically have the same capacity to make vitamin D, it's just different exposure times are required. So this is kind of the way we view things these days. The vitamin D status in primates, and this is what happened early on and what's happening now and what perhaps might happen in the future. But anyway, the status of primates and early humans. Old world primates, they're out in the sun, they're being exposed to sunlight all the time. Can everyone still hear me back there? Are we okay? All right. This y-axis here gives you the plasma 25-hydroxy vitamin D levels, and our target, at least, and there's argument about what this target should be, but most folks think you need at least 80 nanomolar or 32 nanograms per ml. Old world monkeys have very high concentrations of 25-hydroxy vitamin D, quite a bit above this. Humans exposed to sun, like lifeguards and that sort of thing, have the same sort of level. And down here is what some folks consider normal, 40 nanomolar, and it's quite a bit lower than what we see from folks that are out in the sun or animals out in the sun. And whenever we begin to supplement vitamin D to folks who are inside or aren't out very active outside, you have to get up to about 4,000 units a day to actually start approaching the levels of what you see when folks are just out out and about and doing things that they would normally do, but they're in the sun, they're being exposed to the sun. So I guess the point of this whole thing was, how do you figure out what level is normal? Well, why don't we go back to nature and say, look, this is what nature will do for us if we act like we did a long time ago, before we started living in homes and being confined to homes and that kind of thing. This is where we were, and there's some studies that have been done in Africa where they sampled some tribes down there, and this is about where they were. So we believe that this should dictate where we should be in terms of the recommended level of 25-hydroxy in the blood. And we only get there, we only approach that whenever we're consuming 4,000 international units a day. And this is the upper limit that the IOM has set as a safe limit for vitamin D. Now, colon cancer, as I said, colon cancer was one of those cancers that's consistently comes out as being influenced by vitamin D status, i.e. if you get poor status, you have a higher incidence, and the incidence goes down as your status improves. And this is a Women's Health Initiative study where they did the odds ratio of colon cancer as related to plasma 25-hydroxy vitamin D levels. And as you can see here, there was a significant reduction in colon cancer events when we went from 31 nanomolar up to 58 nanomolar. So we believe this is really a true thing. I mean, it's like I say, colon cancer is very consistent, and we think we can have a dramatic effect on colon cancer just by improving the vitamin D status of individuals. Okay, that's a little bit of background of what's been going on in the last couple of years. Obviously, there's a lot of other stuff, but that's the kind of thing I pay attention to. One of the things I've done over the years is develop. We've done a couple things. We've studied metabolism of vitamin D, and we developed assays for vitamin D analogs. And vitamin D metabolism gets pretty complicated. I showed you that metabolism side where vitamin D gets converted to 25-hydroxy vitamin D and then activated through the 1-hydroxylase system. Well, each one of these compounds can undergo side chain oxidation via the CYP24A1 enzyme. And here's the cascade of events that occurs whenever the terminal product here is the tetranor 23 acid of vitamin D, and this happens to both of these compounds, can go through this cascade of events. And so you can see here there's just quite a few metabolites, quite a few steps along the way to deactivate vitamin D, and each one of these can serve to cause a problem and if you're trying to develop analytical methods, and depending upon what methods you're using, some of these things can interfere. Now, that whole thing is made more complicated by the fact that you got vitamin D2 circulating around, and there's quite a bit of that if you're eating plants or if you're taking some vitamin D supplements. Sometimes they're in the form of vitamin D2. Well, vitamin D2 can get kind of weird because you can actually get a pretty significant production of this compound, 24-hydroxyvitamin D2, as well as 25-hydroxyvitamin D2, and their corresponding 1-hydroxylated products. And once again, they all go through these side chain modifications, these oxidation steps, and each one of these can interfere in the whole process of trying to analyze things and getting an accurate measurement. So at the end of the day, we got real busy and developed methods for measuring everything that you saw in those other charts, or those other two slides, in both the vitamin D2 and vitamin D3 forms, and developed methodologies for separating these things and trying to quantitate them. It was a pretty simple thing to do, as you can see here. I had graduate students that were swearing at me all the time. But anyway, you start up here with we're missing a little part up there, but doesn't matter. You start up here with an extraction process. I won't go through this other than to say we start up here with an extraction process, go through several different pre-steps, and actually you can start about 50 samples up here on Monday, and by Friday you're down here at about beer time, 5 o'clock, you're down here. So it worked out pretty good for these kids. They worked pretty hard to get all this figured out. But as you can see, it's just an enormous amount of work to try to get these metabolites separated and be able to analyze them. We used back in the day competitive binding assays. Now you can use LCMS methods. And some of these can actually be where we actually determine or detect it directly by high pressure liquid chromatography. So we had a mixture of different assays we did. And we applied these to quite a few different diseases. We had, once this word got out that we could do these things, we got a lot of requests from the medical folks to give them a view of what's going on with vitamin D metabolism and all these sorts of diseases here. Hypercalcemia malignancy was a real interesting disease. That there's a peptide hormone that's produced by tumors called parathyroid hormone-related peptide, and it does the very same thing that parathyroid hormone does in terms of stimulating the 1-hydroxylase enzyme. And it creates a hypercalcemic effect, and so we spent a lot of time separating out what was caused by the malignancy problems versus hyperparathyroidism. We had a group that was trying to figure out, if there was a good diagnostic way of figuring out what was going on between the two. But anyway, that was an interesting thing. And then over in veterinary medicine, we had other diseases. Milk fever, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, and TB dyschondroplasia is a disease in turkeys and some other farm animals, and where bone calcification doesn't occur as well as it should, and so we got involved in that, and vitamin D toxicity, a big problem. In the animal industry, there's, even in the pet industry, and we've gotten involved in a couple of these. The zoo folks send us diets. Every once in a while, they get animals just dropping over. Recently, we had some canaries that were dropping dead in a zoo, and they couldn't figure out what it was, and so they sent some blood to us, and we figured out, well, the company that made the feed didn't make it properly, and they had way too much, like 1,000, 2,000-fold more vitamin D than they needed, and that caused a toxic problem. So they were been very useful in our laboratory. Okay, we kind of pared this down. Obviously that was kind of ridiculous to try to do everything in terms of vitamin D metabolites. So we at Heartland, we focus mainly on these analogs here, or these metabolites here, the D2 and D3 forms. And we use a mixture of HPLC, LCMS, or RIA, or a combination of all to measure these. And we do them in several matrices: milk, meats, feeds, blood. We can do quite a few. And one of the big there's folks that are interested in how much vitamin D is stored in fat. So we get fat samples in, and you can imagine how hard that is to work with. Just a lot of material there to get rid of, so you can get down to measuring these things. But we get the job done. Last thing I wanted to talk about was milk fever prevention. I'm pretty partial to dairy cows. I own a farm, Jersey herd, up in northeast Iowa, and grew up on a farm, so I love being around dairy cows. And one of those diseases that we studied was milk fever and subclinical hypocalcemia. Subclinical means that they don't really show all the signs of milk fever, where they actually milk fever is what did I got here? Let's see. All right, this is probably a better slide to talk about this. When animals go through parturition, now this is day 0. This is the day they give birth to their babies. And we sample animals all along this period of time. And whenever they begin, a day or so before they are ready to give birth, some of these animals get very low plasma calcium levels. And they get so low that these animals, they become unconscious. They lay down and they just lay on their side, and they'll die if you don't take care of them. And so this is what I observed whenever I was a kid. Some animals dying of these and it just, thought it would be a good thing to try to figure out. And some of these animals, they don't get low enough to get milk fever or hypocalcemia, but they get low. It's low, and this can cause some problems with introducing other issues, other diseases. When they're hypocalcemic, they just don't function quite as well as what they do when they're normal calcemic. So this is what happens here. This is a cow that actually has a disease. And the way we treated it for a long time was, this guy's giving her a bottle of calcium. Here, 10 grams of calcium, infusing it IV. And it's the most dramatic thing you've ever seen. These animals are laying out flat on the side. You give them an IV bottle of calcium, and they're within 20 minutes they're up running around like nothing ever happened. That's not quite true, but anyway, they're feeling a heck of a lot better than they did when they were in this situation. And like I said, the hypocalcemia can result in a lot of problems. We get mastitis, that's an infection of the udder. Displaced abomasum, that's cows have a stomach that's very similar to ours, our stomach, and sometimes you get gas in it and it gets twisted around, and they call it a displaced abomasum. It requires surgery to fix it. And animals with hypocalcemia actually can have a higher incidence of that. Ketosis, fatty liver are issues, and the immune function with the mastitis. Retained placenta is another issue which can result from animals with hypocalcemia. Just to give you an idea what happens in a dairy cow when they start lactating. There's the two main inputs of calcium into the extracellular pool is from bone calcium resorption and intestinal calcium absorption. And these are all regulated. Calcium absorption is regulated mostly by the active form of vitamin D, bone resorption by parathyroid hormone and the active form. And so a cow, a 500 kilogram cow probably has about 3 grams of calcium floating around in their blood at any given time. Well, just before they give birth, we're asking this cow, and this all happens within a period of about 24 hours, we're asking this cow to put out 20 to 50 grams of calcium into her colostrum to feed our baby calf. And this is resulted from genetic selection and other things. But anyway, we're asking her to do this because cows are producing more and more milk these days. So she has to turn over this extracellular calcium pool, which has only 3 grams. In order to get 50 grams into the milk, she has to turn that over about 15 times during the course of a day. And there's other losses due to fecal excretion and urinary loss, but this is a major loss of animals calving time. And this is the part that we were trying to figure out how to avoid allowing them to actually deal with this sudden onset and dramatic onset in calcium needs in the mammary gland. Now, one of my first publications was studying this disease, milk fever, and we had one of the first assays for 125 dihydroxyvitamin D. This was back in the 70s, and we monitored the 125 levels in the blood of these animals because we thought maybe there was a problem with them producing the active form of vitamin D. If you didn't produce the active form of vitamin D, you can't absorb calcium, you can't resorb calcium. So that was a potential problem. But no one else had this thing around, so we were very fortunate to get this thing going, and actually it resulted in a publication in Science. One of my first publications was in Science back in the early day. But anyway, as you can see here, the 125 level was not a problem. If they started getting hypocalcemic, the 125 levels began to elevate and respond like we would expect to in an animal with hypocalcemia. So we thought, well, let's try giving these animals let's try shifting this curve more or less to over here. Can we do that? Well, one way you can do it is by giving injections. So we gave injections of 125 dihydroxyvitamin D. As a matter of fact, we gave injections of a lot of things we could think of. These are 24-fluoro. I mean, this compound here isn't degraded as fast. 125 requires 24 hydroxylation, and if you put a fluoride there, it disappears very slowly. Here's another compound we used. We used vitamin D3. But anyway, what we did, here's this white line here, shows what happens in a cow that doesn't get any vitamin D analogs, or they're not treated prior to parturition with any vitamin D3 analogs or vitamin D analogs. And you plot the plasma calcium against the 125 response, and they respond as is shown along this white line. Those animals that were getting vitamin D analogs, if they ever got hypocalcemic, and a lot of time this happens when they get 2 or 3 days into parturition, they weren't able to do that. So we created a real problem. There was a big feedback problem there. We prevented them from actually getting their 1-hydroxylase stimulated and producing 125 in response to hypocalcemia. So these things just never work, and we spent a lot of time, a lot of years on this thing, and just could never make it work. Well, this is sort of an introduction to the last part of my talk, and that is studying the acid-base balance and how that affects vitamin D metabolism and milk fever in dairy cattle. And this is a guy I worked with at the University of Wisconsin along with Hector DeLuca. This guy's named Dr. Neil Jorgensen. But one of the first things we did was to feed ammonium chloride to in this particular experiment we fed goats. But ammonium chloride causes a metabolic acidosis in animals. And I'll show you why that's important here in just a minute. And this guy here, Jesse Goff, he's my colleague. He's a co-owner of Glycomir. And we follow the same sort of strategy here, only we started putting hydrochloric acid, feeding animals with putting a little bit of hydrochloric acid in their feed, and again, we created a metabolic acidosis. And we published a paper on all this and how it works to prevent milk fever in dairy cows. Now, what happens here is that ruminants, animals that graze, they're out grazing in the fields and so forth, consume a diet normally it's very high in potassium. And most ruminants, as opposed to monogastrics, are in a state of metabolic alkalosis. Their pH, their blood pH is higher than normal. It's about 7.4. Normally, we are running around with pH of about their pH is about 7.44. We run around with a pH of about 7.4. So there's a very slight elevation, which is very significant elevation in pH of 0.04 pH units, which is a pretty big difference in terms of physiology. So these animals that consume these high potassium diets are more likely to develop hypocalcemia than animals that we feed acidogenic diets with. Chloride is very acidogenic. It'll cause a metabolic acidosis, cause the urinary pH to drop, and the blood pH to drop. And here's what happens. Very dramatic difference in the incidence of hypocalcemia in these animals. The animals on high potassium diets, their blood calcium shown over here, days around parturition, here again, the day they give their birth to their babies. Calcium drops down here in those animals that get these high potassium diets. If we come back in with chloride, it's not much chloride. It's like putting vinegar on your salad. It's about the same thing. They don't get nearly as hypocalcemic, and we don't see the milk fever problems that we see with the other. This was 20 animals, and almost all the animals in this experiment in this diet got milk fever. None got milk fever up here. So it was a very dramatic difference in the incidence of milk fever. So here's the way it works. The readily absorbable cations like potassium and sodium is another one. These are cations that are very high, can be at very high levels, especially potassium in diets of ruminants, cause an elevation in blood pH. And what it does, it interferes with the function of parathyroid hormone at its target tissues. And parathyroid hormone can't work. It can't do its job. It can't get to the tissue and turn on the 1-hydroxylase or create bone resorption. And it results in hypocalcemia in these animals that have a sudden need for a bunch of calcium. Also, here's another side sort of note that it also interferes with magnesium absorption from the rumen. That's a whole different story. But anions, or acidogenic ions, they're readily absorbed like chloride, sulfur, result in reduction in pH, allowing the parathyroid hormone to do its job. Phosphorus is also an anion, but it has its own direct effects on the 1-hydroxylase, so it really can't be counted as an anion, although it does create an acidotic effect. So we formulate dairy cattle rations based on the chloride and sulfate contents for these animals that are ready to give birth, and have been very successful at reducing the amount of milk fever in these animals. This is just a cartoon to just show you what I just told you in those last slides. The main point is to try to get this production of this up and prevent that 1-hydroxylase becoming desensitized to parathyroid hormone. So I think this is my final slide, but anyway, the etiology of this disease, we believe it's high potassium or high sodium, creating the metabolic acid alkalosis, again, decreasing sensitivity to parathyroid hormone, decreasing production of plasma or 125, and decreasing all these events that are needed to get calcium into the system, and they result in hypocalcemia. So I think that might be my, yeah, it's my last slide. So if, I'd be glad to take questions. If you, I can't see anyone.
In a book I read about folk medicine in Vermont, the doctor who wrote the book said they always use apple cider vinegar. You mentioned that before.
Yeah.
He said that's what they always use with that problem, apple
Yeah.
cider vinegar.
Apple cider vinegar. Oh, really? In cows?
Yeah, the dairy cows, when they had that fever problem you mentioned.
Yeah.
If you use hydrochloric, it's not far away from apple cider vinegar.
No, apple cider vinegar is it's a weaker acid, but it creates the same effect.
Yeah, he said that's what they use all the time.
Yeah. Anybody else? Back? Yeah.
I know you mentioned getting vitamin D natural.
You're gonna have to speak up. I can't hear
I
you.
know that you mentioned getting vitamin D from natural sources like the sun, but what other ways are you recommending besides cow milk? Do you recommend supplements?
Well, cow's milk is only high in vitamin D is because we put it there. So, but it's a great source of calcium and other nutrients. So yeah, I recommend cow's milk. That helps my bottom line with my dairy farm. If you the more milk you drink, the more. But it's got to be supplements. We got involved with the mushroom folks. I think I said, did I say something about mushrooms? I thought I did. But anyway, the mushrooms are a great source of vitamin D if they're irradiated. And so you go to a store and it has a Monterey mushrooms, here, and a good source of vitamin D. Well, that's true. We do all their work for them. We do work for all these mushroom folks, and we know what they're putting into their what's going on with their products. So that's a source. Walmart. I mean, vitamin D is cheap. Go to Walmart and get a couple thousand unit pill, and take that. And it's not very expensive, and that's the way I would try to handle things if you wanted to improve your status. Just go out and buy a supplement. Especially, I mean, we're coming upon winter here. Well, not here, but quite as much as in more northern states. But anyway, we're going to need to start supplementing with vitamin D, and that's the way I would do it. I myself take oral. The oral supplements. Yes?
When you take dose of vitamin D supplement, do you need to do the all way because the vitamin D is kind of the big soluble molecule instead of the water itself?
Okay,
The
so
vitamin D is the big hydrophobic structure. Do you need to drink all your substance before you take the vitamin D?
No. No, you just pop a vitamin. It's a lipid. Vitamin D is a steroid, so it's handled and it's absorbed a lot like other lipids, and it's very efficiently absorbed. So you really don't have to take anything else to get it to actually be absorbed or anything along with it. But most of these supplements, you'll have calcium and vitamin D. We're working on some vitamin waters now. We have some good ideas on how to go about getting some vitamin D and vitamin waters, and got a company pretty excited about what we're up to. So there's going to be, there's the irradiation is the best way. We all can't do that, so you got to get out and take supplements and go eat foods that are higher in vitamin D. So. Any other questions? I guess we're getting ready to eat.
Give a round of applause to Dr.
Thank you.
Give the direction to the dinner room. When you walk out of this room, make a left turn first and a right turn, and then enter the buffet room. Then when you have your plate full, leave from the other door, so we don't crash to each other. So here, left turn first, right turn. And the plate, pick up your plate, fill your plate, and leave on the other side of the door. And then come back here. And dessert will be served at the end of the dinner. Dessert will be placed here for the post session. And we will have wonderful selection for dessert. Enjoy as well.
Yeah.